Democratic National Convention is gearing up for protests when the convention kicks off next week in Chicago. The city is expecting thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters to descend on the city, but one pro-Israel nonprofit, the Israeli American Council, may not be able to stage their demonstration. The group told Jewish Insider, which first reported the story, that they submitted 2 applications with Chicago's Department of Transportation last month, but the group has not been given the go-ahead. Per the Jewish Insider, the city rejected the group's first request, citing a conflict with previously scheduled activity. IAC was given the option to rally at another park on the last night of the DNC, but it declined, saying it was too far from the convention center. Pro-Israel supporters are crying that there is a double standard. IAC CEO Ilan Carr expressed outrage, posting on X, quote, "Disgraceful that Chicago is showing its bias in favor of anti-Israel groups by granting them a permit to march outside the DNC, but refusing to act on a similar permit application from IAC, the only pro-Israel group to apply." In an email, a spokesperson for the city, Erica Schroeder, told Rising that it supports the right to protest and, quote, "The political or other affiliation of a group is not a factor when reviewing permit applications. When a permit is denied, the applicant is given an alternative route per the requirements of city ordinance that allow the parade to proceed while accounting for police resources, security, safety, and other additional factors."
Meanwhile, the city is preparing for major pro-Palestine protests at the Democratic meeting. According to News Nation, the group March at the DNC 2024 will gather at Union Park, only a 10-minute walk from the convention center. The protesters say they want an immediate permanent ceasefire in Gaza and conditions on military aid to Israel, policies which newly minted Democratic nominee Kamala Harris has yet to embrace. So it sounds like the pro-Palestine protesters put in their permits first. And so because they were in a designated area, this seems to me like an effort from the Chicago police to ensure these two groups, who are on opposing sides of a very emotional, heated conflict, from being in the same place. Because we've seen across the country, when counter-protesters show up and the police cannot establish a line between them, things have gotten violent. There's been fighting. There's been agitators who have gone into the encampment and just started tearing things down when protesters were camping out at UCLA. And so I really think this is an effort from law enforcement not to pick sides politically. I don't think the Chicago police are all pro-Palestine guys. I really think it's about them trying to make sure that there isn't a fight breaking out. I will also say the DNC is representing an administration that just gave $3.5 billion to Israel. So yes, those protesters are protesting the DNC. The pro-Israel protesters are protesting the protesters. So do they need to be close to the convention? They're not protesting the people inside. So if they want to decline their permit, that's fine. But I do think this was an action taken by the police to avoid violence.
Look, I don't know enough about the situation to really comment on it. I think that the rules need to be fair. If the Palestinian group applied first, and there's like a finite number of people that can be permitted in the space, then the rules are the rules. I do think the city and the police should absolutely facilitate the pro-Israel people being able to hold a demonstration to the same extent as the pro-Palestinian side. The police have an obligation to prevent violence, but the groups have to be, to some degree, allowed to hold demonstrations and counter demonstrations near each other, and then anybody who starts getting violent can get arrested for doing so on either side. It's like you can't, the mere fact that someone could commit violence is not, to my mind, sufficient reason to overcome the First Amendment obligation to allow people to demonstrate in public spaces near to the DNC. Of course the pro-Israel people want to be near to where the DNC is taking place, because they want to encourage the DNC to be more pro-Israel. They want to show the DNC that there are pro-Israel Democrats and that they shouldn't cater to the pro-Palestinian side. And the pro-Palestinian people want to do the same thing, and they absolutely have the right to do so as well. The difficult situation is probably that the DNC does not want anyone protesting at all. They don't want these two very acrimonious groups near their convention, fighting with each other, because that's bad for optics. It makes it look like the Democratic coalition is not a coalition, is dysfunctional, there's a lot of internal disagreement over this issue, as there is. They want to, to not manifest what is the truth, is that there are a lot of people who disagree about the policy. So I see why they might leverage the city to say, can you just deny the second? They probably don't like that the pro-Palestinian one was granted, but there's nothing they can do about that. Like, maybe don't have the other people protesting so close so it doesn't become a big news story with people clashing. But the First Amendment doesn't care about what looks good or bad for the DNC, so they should be able to protest nearby.
I don't think the Chicago police are taking orders from the DNC, but I will say, Robby,
I don't know if they are or not.
Questioning our freedom to protest. There's a lot of organizers who look at these protesters and say, why are you asking for permission from the government, which are you are protesting, to protest? At that point, if you have a permit, that is just a parade. And so there needs to be some kind of actual standing up to the government for it to be a legitimate protest and not a parade, right? We're not protesting to make people feel at ease and staying out of their way. The protest intentionally is supposed to get people's attention. It makes people uncomfortable because the people in Gaza right now are the most uncomfortable people in the world because they're experiencing a genocide. That's what protests are supposed to do. So this idea that the permits determine where and if people are protesting is a little ridiculous.
I mean, I making the people in charge of government policy feel uncomfortable can be a valid tactic of protests. I agree. I think sometimes the protesters, maybe particularly leftist protesters, but just protesters of all kinds, mistake, the like throwing soup at things protesters if we just make everyone uncomfortable, that will make our ideas more popular, which is a really inane idea. There's a difference between making the people in power, the people who can vote for policies, feel vulnerable in some way or feel that they are not popular, that they are targets, is a little bit different from making like ordinary everyday people who live in these cities feel who are trying to get to work feel who want to use the public spaces too, feel inconvenienced. That I don't think is at all productive, which is where the permitting process comes in. I mean, a public space, this is permissible under the First Amendment framework. A public space, there can be time, place, manner restrictions as long as they are ideologically neutral on who can use the space at what times. They can't discriminate in favor of one group or against one group for ideological reasons or, of course, race or gender-based reasons, but they can, or else there would just be, or else the public spaces wouldn't be able to be used at all.
Yeah, I think there's definitely people who are protesting who are not making some kind of mental calculation. What is this going to have a positive strategic effect to have the world, or a world that looks similar to the one I want to see, where people are not genocided or the U.S. government doesn't support genocide? Is my action going to work towards that ends? I think a lot of people, their activism is just emoting because it doesn't have that impact on people in power. But I think there are some good strategic organizers probably behind this. But I think this push to get permits so that people don't get mass arrested is silly. There's always people who are showing up to these events willing to get arrested, and we don't really have a right to protest if we only do it when the police says okie dokie.
More Rising right after this.